Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Louise Rogers, and it is my enormous pleasure to moderate this afternoon's panel. I'm not going to do big introductions. You all know everybody on the stage, but I will tell you who we've got, and then we'll head straight into the conversation. So first of all, I'd like to say welcome to Vish Makhijani, who is the CEO of Udacity, Rick Levin, who is from Coursera, Dennis, who we knows from Udemy, and Chip, who is from Udacity.
To you.
To you. Late in the day, sorry. It wasn't some big announcement that we were making here that you changed, no. Before we dive into the main questions, I wanted the panel to give us some context about how you think about effectiveness and impact in your own markets. And I suppose the first question is, what problem or solution are you trying to design for, and what do your customers expect you to provide in terms of evidence that things are working, that they're going to get what they need from you? Can I start with you?
Yeah, so for us, the ultimate click we care about the most is a job. We focus our efforts in a very narrow category versus folks up here next to me, where we're just about software development, data science, and most recently the world of AI. Our customer, though, is our student. So while the ecosystem is rich and companies play a big role in it, we ultimately care most about our student. And for our students, it's about earning the trust that we're curating the right path for them to that job ultimately.
Our objective is to help learners achieve the outcome they seek when they come to our platform. And so because we have a broader curriculum, for some people that's educational benefit. They want to advance into a good college or from college to graduate program. But for the majority of our learners, like Udacity, our learners are looking for advancing their careers. And it might be a new job, but it might also just be a promotion, a raise, advancement within the company that they're already in, or starting their own business, and we do measure those impacts.
Yeah, so for us, our mission is to improve lives through learning, and it's what we find is for our students, the reason that they typically come to Udemy is to solve a specific need. They're there to actually learn something very specific. And what we look for is we want to make sure that they get into the right course, because we have over 40,000 courses, so there's a broad selection and it's growing quite quickly. So finding that exact course for them is a pretty big challenge for everybody. So that's the first part. And then the second part that we really think about is, can we get them to come back over a long period of time? So they come in to learn a specific skill, but they really stick around for multiple years because they want to learn many other things as well. So it's a combination of that first experience, but also measuring the experiences over many years as well.
We partner with top universities to build what we believe is the world's best digital education. So the university, without question, is our client. Now, of course, when the students win, the university wins. Then when the university wins, 2U wins. So students are a big part of the life cycle of 2U. It's ultimately driven by, I'd say the most important number for 2U is the overall student retention rate. So we share revenue with the university over the life of a student's progression in one of our degrees. So if a student enrolls in a program, that doesn't really matter to 2U. What matters is that they ultimately graduate and have the right outcomes. So pretty simple model. If the university wins, we win. So we focus on student outcomes as much as possible. And today it's at 83% overall student retention, which is typically more akin to a campus program than to an online program.
Okay, so efficacy and impact sort of de rigueur now in EdTech. Everybody talks about it, and yet the wider education market doesn't seem to be totally convinced yet that we've really managed to prove that we are having impact. So as you look at your competitors, clearly some are on the stage with you, where do you become suspicious about the claims of efficiency?
You are trying to start a fight.
I mean, yes. I gave a talk yesterday that was called Channeling Van Halen, EdTechs and Universities, the Best of Both Worlds. That's a little bit of a cheesy reference to one of my favorite bands, Van Halen. But ultimately, the purpose of the talk was really to talk to both EdTech entrepreneurs and to universities about what is a very complicated marriage. And one of the places the marriage falls apart on the side of the startup is, delivering on what you said you were going to do. And so we've been doing this 9 years, and the early days of the company's history we were not nearly as good at that as we are today. And I've found that sort of keeping your promises in terms of all aspects of what we provide to the schools. So quality, scale, business model, all of it together is pretty critical. And I do think it causes at times there to be skepticism from the university, and also probably causes too many entrepreneurs in ed tech to not tackle really big problems.
So yeah, I think from our perspective, and I'm curious what other folks up here feel as well, our belief is that, look, we want to build something that's an organization that's going to last multiple generations. In order to do that, you have to provide customer value. And frankly, I don't think any of us up here would have gotten this far if we weren't doing that in some way, shape, or form. So no matter what we say, what we do, how we track it, what we track, the end result of everything that we do will be some sort of financial metric, whether it's some combination of revenue, growth, profitability, or there's a whole lot of other things. But you cannot ultimately build something that's sustainable by those measures and receive the capital that you need to be sustainable unless you do the right things by your customer, whether that's a university, a student, in our case, an individual instructor, and students as well. So it's some combination of all those. But I think at the end of the day, that is the most important thing. Are you providing the customer value to the constituents that you work with? And if you can't, then I don't think we'd be here already.
I think I agree. So far, this entire ecosystem is kind of flourishing. Everyone's growing. We must be delivering value, or that wouldn't be happening. So even though we all have different approaches and sort of different types of content and different, somewhat different relationships with our content providers and with our users, I think at this point it's a flourishing ecosystem. Now you asked me to say what I was suspicious of in my competitors, and since edX isn't here, I can tell you about what I don't like about edX. How's that?
We can tell it's your third panel.
I think accountability is hard, right? Everybody talks about meritocracies and accountability, but when it comes down to it, it's tough to own up to it, right? Inside of our company, we look at a vast array of metrics. You can't just wait for the job metric only. It's too slow and not twitchy enough, right? So we tend to focus a lot on engagement and so forth. But I think, for me personally, more as a citizen than even an entrepreneur up here, I want the discourse to be about the student and not about the institutions, right? I think because we pride ourselves about being very, very student focused, and I think it's only that way that you're going to get real change to happen. And so I think it's normal for incumbents to fear new entrants and be suspicious of each other, but we tend to not have a lot of competitive discussions in our company, despite my best efforts sometimes. And it tends to be very student-oriented, and actually we're probably lucky that we have that kind of culture.
I can jump back in. Two people sort of hinted at this, and I think it's important to point out, in a way, the time scale is just too short to really know how substantial the impact is we're having. Like, how do we find out about career impact? We don't actually run sort of job placement services yet, like 2U does, like Udacity does. Yep. But we do measure 6 months after you complete a course, we survey the learners to find out what happened. What did they get what they were looking for? Did they get some kind of career advancement? And we get very sanguine and really, in a way, very reinforcing, gratifying results from these snapshots 6 months after. But honest truth, you really want to measure this over a much longer time period. See how often learners are coming back. Are they continuing to use the platform to advance their careers? And we're 5 years old. I mean, I think 2U is the oldest company in this group, and the rest of us started around, I think you were about the same time, 2012, and it's just a short time horizon to really know for sure.
Yeah, I think Rick's hitting a key point, right? Because in our experience with our product called Nano Degree, it's not even 3 years old. Right. And we do have some small proportion of folks coming back for their second or even third in some really rare cases. But that in many ways would be the best evidence that they found it useful, regardless of what that specific outcome was, right? I just came from a panel where we're talking about gigs, right? So, many of our folks who work for Udacity and help our students are folks who aren't employed by Udacity, yet they went to school at Udacity, right? So some of our best graders were our former students in things like machine learning, and one of them, for instance, makes like 10 grand a month, lives in Costa Rica. It's like a perfect lifestyle for them. But if you were to check, well, did they get a full-time job? No, they would have failed that metric, right? So the measurement's changing as well as kind of the time frame as well.
Well, let's talk a bit about what you measure, because one of the questions I have sort of, what are the top 3 things that you look for? And my second part of that question is, are there stats or ways of measuring that get fed to you on a daily basis? Because I have an assumption that everybody could tell me what their yield is, what this month's revenue is, and those important criteria that you get fed all the time. But is it the same for effectiveness and impact? Are those numbers coming through to you on a regular basis in that way?
I mean, I don't think there's any perfect answer to that question. We have people at 2U that are 100% focused on it, and I would say, when I think about the history of 2U, yes, I guess we are the oldest company. We're only 9 years old, right? So it's not, companies certainly don't last as long as our university partners, where you're talking about 200 years of history. And the outcomes metrics associated with the programs, I mean, Vish, the only pushback I would make on the incumbent comment would be that our universities are unbelievably focused on their students. I actually think that they do that much better than the world realizes. It's about helping them make a digital transformation to a brand new format that introduces what I would argue is a huge fear of loss, not fear of change, a fear of identity loss, of how they've done something exceptionally well for a really long time. But when you see them embrace it, they care about quality more than anything else. I mean, Georgetown University School of Nursing and Health Studies cares about their board pass rates and how many babies the midwifery program has delivered. So the individual outcomes metrics are often hard because, as an example, so retention is pretty easy. We know how many students. A fascinating thing in our platform is because it's all weekly live classes, the schools all have to make a decision about whether or not attendance counts to the grade at the graduate level, which on campus they can't do, for the most part. So in every case, they've decided yes, because the platform knows whether you came to live class or not. And ultimately, whether somebody makes it through a program, and then in a case of a program that involves licensure, which a lot of our programs do, you're dealing with a board pass rate. And I felt like when I really won the hearts of the school in each case was when we hit a core metric that made the most value to the student and to the faculty on the campus program, like their board pass rates, which were equal to the campus program. What we're trying to measure now is a bunch of components that get to a sort of deeper level. So we've talked about affiliation, how affiliated they are, because if you think about a great university, your experience, I mean, I was a first generation college graduate, and GW completely changed my life in every possible way. I hadn't seen snow when I got to Washington, D.C. for the first time. So just a transformative experience for me. And so that affiliation I feel for that school, well, I want to feel that in my graduate program, whether it's online or offline. I want to have the same rights and same responsibilities as the campus students. So all of these different outcomes metrics, whether it's advancement, achievement, affiliation, access, how many people you're allowing to experience what was geographically constrained before, I think those are all really important. Some are easier to measure. And for us, ultimately, what I love is 2U is a company that does well by doing good. If we deliver retention through the program, because these are great programs, typically the outcome for the student is exceptional. So, you get an advanced practice nursing degree, or you get a Master of Data Science at Berkeley, and you can't get out of the program before you're poached by a company.
Yeah, so from our perspective, we actually look at some of the longer, what we call artifacts of student success, and we see that manifest themselves again, both in some combination of what we call student satisfaction, either measured in Net Promoter Score or repeatability. So we were actually founded in 2010, so we have some of the older cohort data to actually see, do people come back, and are they engaging with our ecosystem the same way they did the first year as they do in the second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, the answer is yes. Some of this has to do with the fact that we all in some way, shape, or form operate in that segment of education which we call lifelong learning or continuous learning. So by definition, we do expect people to come back, and if you're attracting the right student, these lifelong learners, these right personas, and you are delivering on that value, you will be able to see that. So that's the first piece. The second piece, I would say, is we do look at comparables maybe also outside of our industry. So when we think about
that.
Yeah, so when you think about Amazon Prime is sort of a classic example where, as I understand it, if in one particular year, the people that join Amazon Prime, they spend $100 that year, the next year they're going to spend $120. and the year after they're going to spend 144, so on and so forth. Now that is literally a definition of an amazing organization and business that can continue to grow. In some ways, we also think about, well, if we are able to deliver that amount of value to our students, we will be able to see the same cohort growth, and we'll know that we're doing the right thing.
You know, you expressed some skepticism about, well, do we measure anything other than revenue? We have daily dashboards where you can dig in on well over 100 different variables. At every kind of engagement metric, completions, progression to the next course, the entire funnel, you know, who comes to the site, what do they do next? Do they register? Do they enroll in a course? What's the churn? Who goes out of the pool into dormant users? When do they come back? We're measuring it all, and we have goals around a lot of those. Our quarterly OKRs, or KPIs, are basically, they are obviously linked to revenue, but they're linked to a lot of these learner progress goals as well, include course ratings, NPS, and completions is one we sort of have a long-term goal. I mean, we want to get to 1 million unique course completers within a calendar year by the end of 2018.
I care about twitchier metrics on a daily basis. So just like Rick, you know, the daily dashboard I load mostly is about student engagement and progress, right, across the different nanodegrees we have. Teams get the most urgent emails from me on those topics as opposed to anything else.
And how difficult or easy do you find it to get your organisations to concentrate on the bad news? So I found it very difficult, particularly I think businesses like to find out that they're doing well. I mean, internally there is a sort of drive to do that. And they particularly like to tell their CEOs they're doing well. So it's hard if you're at the head of an organisation to be able to dig down and say, I don't care about the 95% where I'm working. I want to know about the 5% that doesn't work. How do you handle that? Why are you laughing?
I'm looking at one of our analysts out there, and she knows that I know the data better than anyone in the company. So I see all the bad news.
Yeah.
Yeah, today's transparent world, it's kind of tough to hide. I mean, it's only a function if they can make me busy someplace else, I might not
But
see
the
it.
story's all in telling, isn't it? Because, you know, data's data, but there is a way of thinking about data which is concentrating on the upside, and there's a way of thinking about data which really just drives down to the bits that aren't working.
No, I mean, we're up to 1,400 employees. I would tell you that I think the single reason I'm sitting here is the culture. The team is about being brand stewards to schools that have been around for a really long time. And doing that the right way and doing right by the school is about dealing with all of the hard aspects of what we do, and what we do is hard. So we have over 100 full-time employees doing nothing but clinical placements.
Wow.
Anywhere in the United States and now in other parts of the world. Very hard. And ultimately, dealing with the bad news as quickly as you can and upfront. I would argue the culture at 2U is sort of like, my kids are older now, but when they were young, you know, you go to the bowling alley and you could push a button and the bumpers would come up, and you know, that means your 2-year-old doesn't get gutter balls. And in a company that is dealing with the most important brands in the world and doing something that they care about more deeply than any startup could possibly care about, making sure there's no gutter balls is a really big deal. And to me, that's about cultural alignment among a team. I think it's really hard to do well, and you know, super proud of the people that are doing it at 2U. So.
Yeah, I was gonna, let me just build on that. I was gonna echo the comment specifically around company culture. One of our core values is around intellectual honesty and transparency, and that is really important because you know, I've been part of other young organizations and startups where you can just get absolutely derailed focusing on the wrong metric, or what we might call vanity metrics. And we've seen it, you know, within our own organization over the years. We'll say, okay, this is the organization. You start really focusing and optimizing on it, but you realize, oh my gosh, there is still a gap between that and ultimately the outcomes that you're trying to reach. And just because you're blowing that up and it's looking good, if you realize, well, it actually doesn't matter. I'll give you one example where this was a company that was looking to partner with us, and they were sharing some of their numbers, and they say, look at all these students that we're getting. I said, well, what happened? it was in a third world part of the world. And they said, well, we're offering people to sign up. In exchange, they would get entered into a raffle for a really nice iPad. So they really had like no interest in any of the offering, but at the same time, they were showing us this wonderful, hockey stick chart. It's like, okay, but so you have to obviously have the team and the intellectual honesty to look at each other and say, hey, are we doing the right thing? Does this even make sense for what we're trying to accomplish?
One of the things we did at TES was in the early days, we did a couple of pieces of work with Stanford University where we got academics to come and rip us apart. And I remember we had 3 professors from Stanford who did amazing work for us. But I remember having the initial conversation with him, one of them that said, yeah, but what if we find out what if we find out it doesn't work? And I think our belief, like you, would be, well, we'd rather know that than not know that, first of all. And secondly, frankly, at that time, we weren't making any money out of the particular thing. So it's like, I'd rather know now than when I've got lots of revenue running through that. Do you bring in an external view of your, or consultants or academics to look at your effectiveness and impact, or do you do that internally? And how do you think about that?
We don't bring in external folks. Our students give us a lot of feedback. I mean, it's a worthwhile point to discuss and debate, right? Because we've talked about it. Earlier in our days, this has been more earlier in our days. More recently, we should probably revisit it. But earlier in our days, I think what we were doing felt very threatening to folks, so we didn't feel like we were getting a fair shake in terms of the things we were trying to change, right? But for us, our evaluator ultimately are these folks getting hired. So we've mostly looked at companies to say, hey, are we actually delivering what we said we were going to deliver? And we've had to make some changes in curriculum as a result, right?
Yeah.
Like, we thought we were building great Android developers and they might have been failing at X, Y, or Z. And we've reacted to that. So for us, it's been about, do the hiring folks, are they getting what they want?
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
Oh, well, we do this in a kind of interesting way. We don't bring in outsiders strictly, but we bring in our partners. So we have our partners, the universities who provide our content. So we have 150, but we have a group of 20 partners that are heavily weighted to the most active and most engaged universities on our platform. And we meet 3 times a year, face to face, and we take them through the things we're doing, and we spend a whole day, and we just we put on our flak jackets and we take their feedback. And they're really good critics, and they find the problems. They're very astute. Some of it is resistance because we move faster than they do, and they're slow institutions, and so we have to understand. We have to be able to understand and interpret that. But a lot of their criticisms are super valuable, and so that, at least that's some kind of external review. Not really outsiders, but people that have an active stake in how well we do. Mm.
Yeah, so from our perspective, similar to what Vish had mentioned, we go right to the student. We interact with them quite a bit and get a lot of feedback directly from them. Whether it's through surveys, reviews, and ratings, and with their interactions with the different courses. So that's one piece. But more importantly, quite honestly, is what they actually do. We track exactly how they interact afterwards, because telling us and sharing with us how they feel about it is one thing, and actually tracking their actions is another. There's this old story out there. I think there was a user group focus study years ago where they had the little radio boom boxes, and they were asking a crowd, which one do you want, the yellow one or the black one? Everyone said, no, we want the yellow one. Okay, great. And at the end of it, they said, okay, you can grab one on the way out. And everyone picked the black one on the way out. So you have to do some combination of both in terms of how you listen, how you observe your customers, and making sure that you're delivering that value.
We know each other's businesses pretty well, and I would say bringing some of the consumer-backed metrics to the universities is something we're proud of, like the Net Promoter Score. But we effectively are the university. One of the reasons why 2U is not really well known is we stand behind the universities. So the university's front and center. This is their program, their degree in every way. It's not ours. And ultimately, they care more about quality than any single thing I could possibly want to talk to them about. So it's kind of a continual eval process. We sign a 10 to 15-year contract, and our job is to make them great always. Like we are continually working on the courses, we're continually refreshing the courses, to the point where you take like one of our oldest partners, the USC School of Social Work, we've completely redone the entire degree, and it's not a short degree, over the now 6 years that we've worked with that school. So it's kind of continual evolution of the offering. And that doesn't just go to the tech. The tech is critical, but it's the live environment, the cross between the live and the asynchronous, the intensives, the immersions that happen on campus. All that fits together to drive what is a really high quality experience. So it's sort of continual evaluation. We do have outside experts. We just did a big grant program where we're actually studying with sort of forward-seeking grants through our institutions, a bunch of different learning as outcomes, but not just on the learning side, also the advancement, we would call it advancement, like are you getting the job? Because of the breadth of offerings of 2U, I think we're in 24 disciplines today. So we've got everything from data science to, we just signed a doctor of physical therapy with USC. They are very different disciplines, and therefore what happens on the campus is wildly different at those two schools. So that's a sort of constant, there is no cookie cutter version of a 2U program. We have to work directly with the school to really build something of quality.
Thank you. So in preparation for this, I thought, as we were talking about
Right, we got to mix it up here. It's like 4:30. Everybody's waiting for happy hour.
Well, what do you want to say to me then? We don't track anything.
We can just bust out into karaoke right now.
So one of the things I did was I talked to 4 bankers, because I thought, well, they're the people who are valuing our businesses. So are they really putting value on impact and effectiveness or not? So I spoke to Victor Hugh from Goldman Sachs, and Tariq Hussain from Jefferies. I spoke to Deborah, obviously from GSV, and Susan Wolfer from BMO. And I said, really, okay, when the rubber hits the road, and when you're valuing these companies, or when people are looking to invest or acquire companies, how much real value are you getting for the work that you're doing around impact assessment?
I mean, I feel like as the only public company here, I can tell you that it is front and center in every single investor presentation we give, and has been and will continue to be. And I do really believe that number, ultimately student retention drives, you don't have to believe me, just look at our financials. We share revenue as a student progresses through a program. By definition, that creates an alignment of interest, whether it's because I'm a good guy or not. It is simple math. We do really well the longer they stay. And so we just acquired a company called Get Smarter that's a great South African company that works with extremely high quality institutions, Cambridge, Harvard X, MIT, University of Cape Town, U Chicago. And what was so attractive to us about Get Smarter was we were stunned by an 88% completion rate for short courses. I'd never seen anything like it. It was higher than our degree completion rate. And to me, that was a huge factor in why they were worth paying for. Excellent quality. So I do think that there is a correlation. It's a bit of a loose correlation at times.
Yeah, that's basically what they said, but that it's getting better.
It's getting better. Well, why? Because if you look at the history of online education, why do I call it digital education instead of online education? It's been a rough road. And ultimately, as the sort of only public company doing this today from the nonprofit space, where we work with nonprofits, we need more people in the system, because even getting to our IPO was complicated. We had no comps to point to. So Victor, actually, Goldman did a great job for us. It's a tough thing to balance, but ultimately we do believe that there's a reason we have it at the forefront of every single presentation we give. It is the real story behind the success of 2U. Now that has led to a positive financial valuation, which is important, because I'll tell you, sustainability is not optional. You got to have a long-term model for both sides of the equation, for me and for the university partners.
Right.
This isn't really a fight, but a quibble.
Quibble, go
here's
for
a
it.
quibble.
See, now it's getting interesting.
Yeah, look, retention, it may be an outcome measure for you, but for an analyst looking at the value of the company, it's just a predictor of future revenue. So, whereas there'd be other kinds of impact metrics that would be perhaps less closely tied to revenue. So, Louise was saying, do they really care?
No, but Rick, they care about, why did my first 4 clients sign up and extend the contract from between 2028 to 2032? They're smart people. They're not doing it because we're nice. They're doing it because we're driving big value for them. And that includes, ultimately, the outcomes metrics, more important than any financial metric. But the story is both. The story is
that's a better
sort of
argument.
both outcomes metrics and dollars.
Yeah.
They need to make this transformation. It's my opinion that if you look at the $80 billion of graduate education, it's super obvious to me that it will all go online over time, all of it. The value prop is too strong. Why should you pick up your life, quit your job, and move to attend a great school if you can get everything that you can get on the campus with that kind of high quality, same faculty, same degree, same rights, and therefore same responsibilities, same admissions requirements. So you put all that together, and both sides do matter to them. But the number of times that my general managers who run each program are in a conversation about some particular outcomes metric, whether it's board pass rates or the job or the net promoter scores, which has been an education process, like you'd be fascinated by it, total business metric being driven down to the course level inside each institution. And now you've got our schools asking us for them in a way that I think shows their evolution. They've become really savvy about their own offering, and it is theirs, it's not mine. So, they care about it more than I could possibly care about it, because every morning they get up to do this.
Is the same true of social impact? Because we've been talking really about effectiveness and impact in slightly in a monetary sense, but what about social impact and open access? And those things that are much more difficult to measure, but we know from all of you that that's going to be an important part of how you look at that.
It drives all of our employees. I think one of the things that's a challenge, I would tell you, and how this is measured and managed, is if you want fabulous outcome rates, as we're talking about this one, just have a wicked tough screen at the front. I mean, it's a classic mechanic of academia over decades, if not centuries, right? Our platform has some levels of applications now where we try to make sure you're not going to something where you're going to pull a muscle. But we're default open, right? Default open has a lot of carnage to it, right? And so, our founding story, right, of the first ranked Stanford AI student coming in at 413th is like fundamental to our open mission, right, of democratizing education. So we have a constant battle on how we go about doing that. We default open, and that's how I coach our folks to be. And so they have to try and drive up their student performance metrics in light of a disadvantage, right, of being not as selective on the front end of this stuff. I will tell you this, with full respect to Victor, because I love Victor, most investors we talked out are private financing, it's not public financing stuff. The vast majority were just very classic investors, right? So they look at all the classic P&L driven metrics. We were blessed with a lot of demand for our last financing, which is now over a year ago. We went with Bertelsmann because they actually have a strong thesis around this, right? So they care about changing these things that we're changing in what we're tackling. That's made Kai a great board member, and that's made them fabulous investors for us too.
But you think it's fairly unusual, in fact?
Yeah, he was definitely more the minority there too.
Right.
So.
Interesting.
Dennis, what about?
When we look at our ecosystem, 2/3 of our students actually originate from outside the U.S. Almost half of our instructors originate outside the U.S. And actually our courses are taught by 20,000 instructors all over the world in 80 different languages. So we don't actually accomplish our mission to improve lives through learning without actually having as big of a footprint as possible. And when you think about our economic model and engine, it is actually driven by having more activity all over the world. So, we feel really lucky to be able to see all this activity happening and understanding and realizing that we are having an impact for students and instructors all over the world who typically don't have that access. And we think of ourselves, and probably similar to other folks here, by bridging time and space, using technology to bring the right instructor content to students who otherwise literally would not have a school to go to. So it's an important facet for our core mission and certainly our employees as well.
And now you have so much data and so much history between you. Are you able to really drill down into how different cultures or genders or other types of learners are really getting the most out of your platforms? Are you able not just to tell us that things are efficient, but actually who it's efficient for and who it is efficient not for? I mean, you must now be having that sort of data set.
So I think the data analytics layer inside of 2U is one of three sort of decisions we made that I wouldn't be here without having gone that path. Live classes, very early on, we made that decision. Working with multiple programs in each discipline, we made that decision. This one started on the business side. So Vish, I'm not trying to tell you that investors don't care about our P&L. They totally care about our P&L, of course. And they care about the financial returns that will be associated with 2U. But ultimately, that sort of analytics layer will drive the right outcome. So it started focused on the business side. It started with a marketing challenge. It was really hard. We're trying to find a needle in a haystack on a worldwide basis, somebody that can get into, afford, and wants to attend a great US university. And we make no admissions decisions. But we spend all of the money on the people that either get declined or don't attend. And so it became really a data exercise to have an algorithm that would predict enrollment that would allow us to spend the money wisely. Once we got there, we built a program selection algorithm that would help us select programs. And now our data scientists are driving it through the life cycle of a program, all the way down to the student level, all the way through to graduation. So an example of that, to your question, would be using the analysis to determine that in one of our public health programs, the single largest dropout group was actually the most sought after drop group by the school, which was doctors, physicians. And so the physicians were dropping out at an alarming rate because basically they would get to stats and they would freak out because they hadn't taken math in a really long time. And so being able to come up with a core plan for them from a remediation standpoint was critical and will drive the number up, which then comes back to driving the one number that ultimately drives the P&L, which is retention.
Yeah, so from our perspective, the data and the data science behind what we do is hugely important. And if you think about it in a lot of ways, in no other point in time in history have organizations been able to aggregate so much teaching and learning in one single place and be able to understand that. So, we actually, for ourselves and folks up here, I think because you're on the East Coast, you weren't able to attend, but we recently had a data science summit that we held at our office with a whole bunch of different providers, including Coursera and Udacity and others, where we just had the different data science teams come in, present what they're working on, how they're thinking about it, and it was hugely helpful for everybody.
That's fascinating, actually. And do you feel like as a group you now have a responsibility to drive that thought leadership and define the common language which allows us all to understand what impact really looks like? Because you could do that, and that there isn't that common language. Mm-hmm. So do you feel, do you obviously get together and talk about your data?
We can really do more. One thing we do is we do meet at least annually with research, with the community of researchers on MOOCs and on online education from our university partners. And quite a number of them using our data to study various pedagogical experiments and just learn some things from the data. You asked initially about what do we learn from differences in demographic groups, and that's something we do pay attention to. Now, it's a balancing act because I'm as an empirical social scientist, I would love to ask every learner who comes on the platform a lot of demographic information, but that kind of puts a roadblock in the registration process, and you don't want to put a lot of barriers in there. So I'm told by all these young people that are telling me these things, and get them to convert, and so we don't get a lot. But in those outcome surveys, 6 months retrospectively, we do ask a lot of demographic information, and so we get some really amazing results. Like, take the question of, did this course have a material impact on your career? By which we mean you got a promotion, a raise, a new job, or started a business. The global number for that is about 30% of the people who were taking the course for a career objective. If you're low SES with no college degree in a developing country, it's 48%. So that's pretty amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to throw questions out to the floor now.
Let's do it.
Hi, I'm curious, what do you think of the long-term role of MOOCs like Coursera versus institutions' own offerings like through 2U, for example?
Oh, you're really trying to get us to go at it. I mean, I've said recently publicly that I think the first wave of online education was for-profit, and you have to at least give them the credit that they did take the entire sort of internet seriously and really try to drive change there. And I believe the second wave really was MOOCs. And I do believe the third wave is what you just suggested, that schools offering their entire assortment over time through the internet. And I do believe we were important in pushing that, but probably not as vocal as we should have been, because honestly, the first 5 years of 2U's history, I just wanted it to work. So, there hasn't been a tremendous amount of promotional DNA inside the company. It's my job to promote Berkeley, not to promote 2U. So, but I do believe right now, the sleeping giants aren't awakening, they're awake. And I do think that's where the Purdue-Kaplan deal is fascinating. For a public institution to embrace it that way, I do think is meaningful.
Any other questions? It's hard to see, but I'm sure, yes, we have one here.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, and you started to talk about this, but the role in closing opportunity gaps in our country. I would imagine that a lot of the completers are disproportionately people who have bachelor's degrees already and disproportionately from selective institutions. So could you talk a little bit about how these tools will ultimately be used to close opportunity gaps?
I mean, it's true that, for instance, in our more advanced programs, many of the folks in our advanced programs are white males from software companies, right? And we tried very hard, but we still haven't made enough progress to kind of ensure that we're getting a more diverse pipeline coming in. We're trying to do it via different marketing tactics, though. For example, we work with a bunch of different not-for-profits, Girls Who Code and others like that, to try and access those communities. But it definitely doesn't happen overnight, right? We've seen upticks in some of those areas, but not in a hugely material way just yet. Now, what we teach too is also quite a bit narrower than what the other folks up here do, and we're probably the most acute problem as an ecosystem or industry in that way.
So, one of the things that we worry about, and I think this is something that transcends demographics and actually is more of a problem for everybody within our entire ecosystem, everybody here at the conference, is we think more about what we call the ambition gap. And by that I mean, it doesn't matter where you are, what social economic background you have. If you're motivated, we're set up, a lot of times if you think about the different solutions that are out in the market, we're set up for you, but if you don't have that ambition or motivation, it can be difficult. It doesn't matter if you have a college degree or you don't. I mean, I think there's some correlation there to begin with, but that is something that I think remains a big open question for the long run. Like, how do we get all these people, you're providing the access, it's right there for them, but do they actually take it and can they leverage it in the way that you originally designed it for?
Hi, Monde from Stanford. And question on certification. It seems, Chip, you've taken the approach of use the signaling value of the organizations as they are. I'd say Coursera and Udemy is slightly more, your brands are more public and more known, even though you have somewhat of a marketplace on the other side. So just a question on your thinking around certification and how you overcome the barrier as a for-profit of the broader negative signal.
Well, I mean, we are actually offering degrees as well, and when we do that, it's very much like 2U, frankly. The institution is really more front and center in those cases. In the micro-credentials, they're essentially co-branded. I mean, you get a certificate that has both Coursera and the university's logo on it. But it is true that I think in the employment market, people post these credentials and they post them as Coursera credentials. So we do have, there's a little more of our brand involved. I do think that the certificates that we're giving, the micro credentials that Udacity and edX, Coursera are giving, are actually becoming salient markers in the labor market and do have an impact on hiring. And Udacity has probably pushed that dimension further than the rest of us, but we're following happily along in the wake, benefiting from that initiative that, it's increasingly not only in tech, but as we're finding with business courses as well, you know, it's having salience. And we're selling into enterprises now where one of the things employees of large companies want is the certificate. You know, it actually matters, that it's sort of a badge of accomplishment, and companies are starting to take those seriously as just markers of a person's progress in the job.
Sorry, it's just a step though, right? I think we use this new credential, and ours are newer than the older credentials, right? It's just this abstraction that helps somebody say, okay, yeah, I can do X, Y, or Z. Like, we envision a world where that's not necessary, where you have a live representation of what you know now, and a true meritocracy where, like, you know what? Guess what? Vish has been slacking for a couple of years. He's not super up to date on Angular. You know what? He shouldn't get that gig, but somebody else who is way more up to date and is doing great work recently should. But despite like that vision, we know that today people grok this abstraction of a credential, and that's why we think it really serves a valuable role. And as Rick's mentioning, it's taken a little while, not that long, I guess, in hindsight, but like we see it more internationally now too. It's like, you know, when you go work in China, and folks are entering the workforce, they love listing all the different certifications and credentials they've earned. It's like a mark or badge of honor. So I think there's something human about the attainment of this abstraction, but I think it should be live in real time and really current. And in some ways, a certificate is just this snapshot in time at, you know, May of 2017.
Although they have real efficacy. A recent article, which I'm sure you saw and posted as we did, in one of the tech journals, it might have been TechCrunch, basically asked, what is the best predictor of success in a job interview in software engineering? And they went through things like, what school did you go to?
Sure.
Was it a high quality school?
I was going to say,
Where
the
did you
power
go?
of the degree, by the way. I mean,
wait a minute, let me finish.
Go ahead.
But number one was, have you taken a course recently on Udacity or Coursera?
I think you'd be surprised.
I might have shared.
I think you'd be surprised by my answer on this. So we really believe it's an and, not an or. And I mean, our acquisition of Get Smarter,
yes, of course.
we really believe that. We believe
I
the
do
power
too.
of the degree is stronger than it was 10 years or 20 years ago, and we believe there is a ton of room for skills attainment. And you can think about everything on the spectrum. And I mean, tech is way over here, sort of like plumbing used to be, right? We hire a tremendous number of tech people, and there is no doubt that I need them to know Ruby on Rails or whatever it is. But the moment you have a problem in your colon, by the way, you care a lot about where your doctor got their degree. And so, or if somebody's returning from the war and needs a great social worker or lost everything in a fire, there are disciplines that inherently people are more worried about the certification. And I think you could argue should be. But I do believe, ultimately, when we're sitting and looking at resumes, if I have somebody that learned a skill, but also went to Berkeley or some great institution, they're going to get the leg up. So we feel like, from our perspective, it's a lot of and. There's a lot of room.
I have a chip on my shoulder. I'm a B- student from UConn, so like
We no longer require job applicants to list where they went to school. We try to practice what we preach.
Any more questions?
Yes, well, question here. Just really exciting what you're doing, and thrilling for all of us that we can be lifelong learners. One question I have relates to higher education, and I'm wondering if any of you have any concerns. I haven't heard this issue as much. Everything is becoming more efficient, we're reducing costs, but what about the relational side? Having strong relationships that you've developed because you've worked in a group or you've been at the cafeteria together. And how do you see that impact? And do you have any concern that that is going to, is not going to be what it once was?
I mean, I think you can have your cake and eat it too here. We built our entire system on intimacy. I mean, that is the single most common word used when students describe an experience in one of the programs, and it's pretty simple. It's 27,000 plus students, average class size 12. So you are live, it looks like the Brady Bunch, and our hashtag is no back row. Like, you have to come prepared, you have to know, like, you know your material, and then you go physically and do something together. So I just graduated from our University of North Carolina Chapel Hill MBA program, and I didn't do it for the Hair Club for Men Effect or to eat my own dog food. I did it for me. I always wanted an MBA, and I had been in for 4.5 years, by the way, so longer than my undergrad. But I got done, and I would tell you, like, I know these people as well as I knew people at GW. You know, Corey Broussard an engineer at Shell who was stationed on an oil rig in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico getting his degree. And I met him at 4 immersions. We had a great time, went to the Crunkleton, you know, that's a bar in Chapel Hill. You have these experiences. It's an amazing thing, and I think you can, in this case, do both.
Cool.
Any other questions?
Hi, hello. My name is Roberta. Hi. So I'm building a virtual coach to help people to connect to their true selves and ambitions. And I wondered how you guys can solve the problem with discoverability. So we all know that the app stores nowadays have so many apps for people to try out. And I guess when you have so many options of so many courses, it's very difficult to find the one that really will help you to develop the skills that you want to develop. So is there something that is on your radar right now?
Well, we strongly believe in the value of curation, right? There's a reason why we only have 14 nanodegrees. We believe that curation value is one of the fundamental values that a prospective student comes to you for. It's like, what should I learn and who should I learn it from? So we're not as good at the platform as like Dennis is, so we know we have to count on that curation value as a core part of our value proposition.
I think we are in a different position where we have lots of courses. We don't have 40,000, but we have 2,000. And so we're putting a lot of time and effort into developing better AI tools to have really good maps of what courses teach what skills, and then ask learners what skills they want and what skills they think they have. And then we're going to be soon introducing diagnostic tests so that we actually, which Udacity already does to some degree, and therefore to be able to curate effectively by machine what's the best content for a particular learner.
So I would tell you that it is an immense challenge, and I would expect it to be a growing challenge for everybody here, independent of where we are today. I would give you some evidence where oftentimes we find that when a student rates an experience as subpar, it's not because the instructor or the course was not good. It was just the wrong course for them. It goes back to that core discoverability problem. So the way we are working on it is absolutely through data science, and it's a couple different things. One is on the supply side, understanding the courses themselves in a much deeper fashion, tagging them, making sure we understand what the topic is, and the analog here, quite honestly, is Netflix. So if anyone is familiar with how Netflix does it, they literally have over 100,000 tags for every piece of content so they can understand exactly what it is that is there. So that's on the supply side. And then on the demand side, working with our students and trying to better understand their goals, certainly at the right time period within that funnel so you don't block them, but at some point really understand what they are trying to get at. You can do that, I guess, observing or asking sort of directly, or you can do it more passively just by watching them, how they interact with the site to try and understand what they are looking for. And ultimately, you come up with these recommendation algorithms so that that match up what you believe they're looking for and what is actually within the catalog, because it is really, really hard to come up with an incredible search and discovery experience with so much and just rely on the individual just poking around. You really have to provide that. And again, Amazon's another great example of frequently bought together. I mean, all the things that you see in these other consumer experiences, we ultimately have to figure out how to provide that within education as well.
Well, look, we're out of time. I wanted to thank you, obviously, for coming on the panel, but also a big thank you to all of you for all the work you're doing, which I think is really pushing forward everything that education is about. And I think from all of us, it's a huge thank you.
Thank you, Louise.